Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Increasingly, I feel like it's the conversations that matter, right? And the listening that is actually more important now. I think I realized that journey is a lot longer, and the conversations and the articulating those things and refining that, it takes a long time, and it's a lot harder. Part of my realm is that I have a mid-level explore capacity and a high-level excite capacity. So I view a lot of what I do is like getting people excited about stuff. And so if it's not clear and it's not connecting with people, it drives me crazy. I feel like there's always transitions, right? I think the transitions I go through a lot it feels like I don't know they're happening all the time, right? I think that's what's running your own business. Like, I feel like you don't know what you don't know. And so you're surprised or things happen and you don't have a boss or, a good boss who's giving you some sort of perspective, right? There's lots of questions a lot of times. And so.
Hi, everyone. This is Fei Wu, and I am your host for the Feisworld podcast. This week, I would like to welcome Jason Smith to Feisworld. Jason is the managing director and founder at OHO Interactive, a thriving, curious, creative team of 30 strategists, creatives, and developers solving business problems in the digital space. Jason and I connected via LinkedIn in 2012. Over the years, we exchanged ideas on project management, digital strategy, and growing talent. Finally, in May 2016, together with the VP of operations at OHO, Stephanie Kroll, we found just the perfect project for us to work on. Over the past 3 months, I grew closer to the entire OHO team and had the opportunity to speak with everyone in the company. I also developed a tremendous appreciation for founders and understanding for the decisions they have to make, the challenges they have to overcome on a regular basis. So I welcome Jason to open up about his philosophy in running his organization. While we're at it, I took Jason back to where it all began in 1998, 18 years ago, when OHO was just starting up. What was it like to run a company in the late 90s? Jason demystifies the process and shared some of the most important lessons learned. With a degree in English from Brown University and a degree in design from RISD, Jason can brand, construct, and market an experience or a product that enables him to quickly engage with clients and understand their business objectives. He believes that every project brings a myriad of possibilities. And our podcast speaks to a much related belief, which is that Jason also believes that every person brings a unique set of skills and values to the team. To me, one attribute that stands out the most for Jason is the beacon of clarity. Jason speaks with great clarity, always, which to me isn't only an ability, but a choice. Clarity with confidence, knowledge, perhaps timing too, is a crucial ingredient in any business settings, yet it's often missing. Last but not least, I invited Jason to talk about his family, his 3 children who are completely different from one another, and the most important thing he wants to pass on. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode of Feisworld. For more stories on leadership, entrepreneurship, agency, and digital media, please visit feisworld.com. Without further ado, please welcome Jason Smith to the Feisworld podcast. Jason Smith, I've known you for, I feel like a long time. I keep telling everybody since 2012. And I finally had the pleasure to work at OHO, and I've had a blast. And I'm just so thrilled to have you. So welcome to Feisworld.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I feel like I know a lot about OHO, but I really want my listeners to hear from you directly on what OHO is about and the client base and the philosophy and strategy.
Sure. So we're an interactive firm. We've been around for 18 years. I started back in 1998. We're about 30 people, and our focus is really focused on fixing big website messes. So we work a lot with folks who have big content problems usually, and they really need to come in and find a way to straighten that up for their users. And so we think a lot about customer journey and how people move through that process. And we think a lot about their content and how to restructure that. And our overall goal is really to kind of create a better experience for them, but also something that helps companies become more successful in the digital realm.
Nice. Wow. That's a very concise answer. Usually,
that's good. We worked really, really hard to finally get that. So,
you know what I just found out, thinking about the fact that OHO was founded in 98. That's also when the first Google office opened.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I just looked it up because what I was thinking is, since OHO has always been in the digital space, but surprisingly, as of 96, 97, I think only 43 million of the people in the US had computers. And out of that, I think only 17 million had regular internet access. Compared to the rest of the world, I mean, it's like next to none.
Right, yeah.
So what was it like to be, I think, one of the first people to kind of start thinking about interactive digital media? And what was it like back in 98?
That's a great question. So I was a print designer before. I remember using really rudimentary tools to write HTML in tables. So if people still today in the office have to make an email where they need a table, I can troubleshoot that for them. Yeah, I think it was different. I think about stuff we thought about then was bandwidth. People used to think about dial-up, and we were in Cambridge, so we had high speed. We had a cable modem, which was a big deal. But I think we thought a lot more about bandwidth, and we thought a lot about how to actually just make something look okay on the web. Right? We didn't think a lot about what the content was or what the structure was. It was a lot about making it functionally work. I think about how different that is even today to what we're looking at and how we do things. And, we have a client who we're redoing a site for, and we started with them 5 years ago. We built a huge site, and we're redoing the site. And I think realizing the second time around how much we've changed, how much more we think about content and not just getting something into a content management system. 5 years ago, that was a big deal to get it in something that was usable and workable, and how much better the technology is now around all that.
I think your background is really unique. You start talking about design and the fact that, I've known you for a while. I've read your LinkedIn profile, and very quickly after that, I forgot. And the way I look at you, you're a digital strategist. You're leading a lot of the sales opportunities.
Yep.
But your background, actually, you graduated a degree in English from Brown.
Yep.
And you also had a degree from RISD.
I remember when I graduated, I remember having a conversation with someone who was a couple of years older than me and saying, I really want to be a bridge person. And I thought that, I would be in some sort of arts administration or do something like that. And as a kid, I geeked out on I used to build haunted houses. So I think about in my basement, I told someone that and they thought it was a little weird, but I think it's a lot about experience, right? I thought a lot about how do people experience spaces. And then I used to play Clue, and I thought I loved the board game in Clue. And so I used to draw houses, and I would make these houses. They kind of felt like they were sort of like Clue because they had all these amazing big rooms that I would never have in a house. That I had a billiards room and a swimming pool. And but I loved doing that sort of stuff. And then doing sort of design and photography was sort of self-taught for me. And so I had an English degree, and I think I taught at Milton Academy for a summer and did newspaper. Taught a newspaper class. And so I basically helped lay out the publication. And I'd done that newspaper in my high school. I was the editor. I'd run publications on campus at Brown. But I think I stayed up all night one night publishing, and one night I realized I think I'd rather stay up all night designing than I would writing at that point. And so that was the point where I was okay, I'm going to go do that after I graduate. And so
I just remember, actually, there is that interesting. I forgot the name of the degree, but because brown is so close to RISD, you can literally...
You can get a joint degree, yeah.
Is that what you end up doing?
I didn't. I just, I have my degrees from Brown, and we could take courses and cross-register, and I loved RISD, and I think they worked a lot harder than the Brown students did. I was like, holy cow.
I heard.
They drink a lot of coffee and smoke a lot of cigarettes and stay up a lot later than we did, working really hard on stuff.
That's what I heard. As I'm writing down Brown and RISD for the 10th time, I realize it's kind of strange for me because there's so many Brown alumni on Feisworld. I mean, this is not planned. And then so many, I literally, a couple of days ago, I interviewed Anne Spalter, who graduated a few years before you did. She's also this joint degree of Brown and RISD. It's like deja vu. But let's talk about the haunted houses for a second, because Halloween is just right around the corner.
Yes, sure.
So how old were you and how did you build it? Did you invite kids over?
No, we would set up experiences. So we would put a flashlight in one of those plastic pumpkins, and we'd put it through the rafters. We had our basement was a newer house, so it had things where we could put ropes, and we'd put up cords and peel grapes and stick them in something, and we would drop things from the ceiling on a line after they walk by, or we put the tape measure out on the floor and tape things to it, and then it makes a rattling noise when you reel it back in. So we would just do stuff like that. So, but I think it was about coming up with creative things to do and then making that happen.
Speaking of experiences, I feel like what's really obvious to me that in a way, because I have freelanced and consulted at several agencies at this point, what I enjoy the most is the fact that there is an experience for me as well at OHO here, Davis Square. And not to mention the location is really unique. It's kind of this, to me, it's this hip, unexpected. I feel like every time I walk down the street somewhere, I feel like I'm really familiar with this area. And yet I find a new shop somewhere and a really funky store. But also there's something that you really encourage and promote, which is the Friday Lunch and Learn. There's amazing meals, not to make everybody jealous here, but meals served every Friday where the teams are encouraged to kind of go up there, present, share their projects, their experience at recent events. And so was that curated on purpose? Is something that you thought about as well?
Yeah, I think what's great about being owning my own business, and especially at this stage, I feel like we're getting to the point where I think I'm really seeing how everyone brings different gifts and what we need, right? When you start out on your own, I feel like, you're doing everything. I did the books, and I wrote, checks, and I signed up for phone service, and I, bought the computer, and then I printed stuff, and I went to the FedEx, right? Someone does, you do all of that stuff, and people take on parts of that over time. And I think the last part has really felt like the creative part, right? Or the solution itself, right? And I think just in this last year, of just really seeing more people having more to offer and contributing really as a team in a way that it feels really unique, right? It feels like, or maybe it's not unique, but it feels new, in the sense of I think being hey, I think we should go this way, and the team has better ideas, right? They come back with crazy stuff. We're thinking about marketing ideas this week, and someone's we should make a board game about building a website and all the problems that happen. I was what a great idea. That's totally fun, right? We should increasingly finding ways to take those things that people are excited about and be great, let's use that over here, right? And so I think pointing people in the right direction. We had one of our developers come to this cool new video CSS thing that he could do, and he's I just put this together, I think it's really cool. And we're that's awesome. And so we said, let's use that for this presentation that we're going to do. I think that's a great idea. So someone went and shot some drone video, someone else put it together, someone wrote a script for it. And we spent a little bit of time and mocked up a prototype, right? But I think those lunches are an opportunity for people to bring stuff out that they're learning and see things and get conversations going. New ideas come out of that and keeps us moving forward, but it also helps us find out what people are really excited about.
And I feel very much the same way, because the presentation that you weren't able to attend last week while you're out, something I said from the bottom of my heart as I started this project, because the fact that I am here to not only to aggregate information, but also introduce a new way of potentially working together, and everybody from the get-go, one-on-one interview with everyone, the consensus is like, oh, that's great. The one thing they said is they're so grateful that the leadership team decided to invite someone in and try to make everybody's lives better and work better together. And I was somehow so surprised to hear that instead of what I prepared myself for, some level of resistance,
Yeah.
And they were very excited. And at the same time, I got to say, was it yesterday or the day before? The Red Sox game as a company event that I was also so lucky to be invited to. It's interesting because typically I've never really been a huge fan of corporate events.
Yeah.
Big or small, like whether it's go out to a bar or dinner or these social events, because it's always been so awkward. And the fact that everybody has kind of reserved and, is like trying to, I don't even drink. So I watch people kind of go through phases of the drunkenness. It's kind of hilarious. But I have to say that at that event, we were there together for hours, and I just really see how everybody's just so relaxed, having the conversation.
Right.
Nobody's intimidated by the fact that we're not necessarily like baseball fans, all of us.
Right.
I remember people explaining how it all works together. I just start laughing. So, it's an environment. Has it always been this way to you? Do you feel like there's some changes, some transitions that you've encountered to sort of kind of cultivate this culture?
Personally, I think I'm motivated and excited about, I like working in a small, like committed group, right? So to go back to my earlier days, right? Like I used to do theater too, but I did the tech side of theater, right? And I liked that experience of working really hard, working really long hours, working, but with like a small team for like a very intense period of time, right? Like I liked that small team experience. Or my dad was a television director, and so he produced and directed television commercials. And so in the summers when I was starting high school, I worked for him, and I would go do grunt work and move stuff around. And the days are long and it's intense, but I like the kind of small team, kind of committed and loyal and kind of working together, right? And so I think that feels personally satisfying to me. And so I think I kind of want that experience. I like being helpful. I like being useful. I like thinking deeply about a problem. And I like having people like that on our team, right? And I think our team is, I think we look for really smart people that our people are really focused on like, how do we make it excellent? And can really think about the nuance of the problem, right? And I think that's what gets people together, right? And so there's friction in that sometimes, and people see the problem differently or see the solution differently. And that's part of the process. But I think in general, people really try and get at like, what is the right thing to do? And I think that's really what gets people together, right? Like they're kind of constantly problem solving, not just the problem of like, what did we get hired to do, but the problem of getting the project done, and the problem of getting along with everyone, and the problem that the client has about that other person who's really not on the page, right? And how do we get them all together, right? And I think our team's really good at figuring out all that stuff together, and they enjoy that experience, right? Like I think they're respectful of one another, and they value that people are doing it, and that I think that's why people do it, and I like it, right? I feel like I want to come to work and have fun with the people and laugh a lot, and and I think we're all just trying to do what's right in the midst of that. So.
I like the quote that I've seen, which is, I don't know who quoted you, is you believe every project brings a myriad of possibilities. And what you just described is, I think you believe every person brings just that as well.
Sure, yeah.
So I find that you're very forgiving as well. So I think that gives people an opportunity to fail, even though the intentions are very good. So they fail without feeling that they will be punished because they try something new, or they felt the need to speak up.
Right.
And this morning I got an email from Alt MBA. I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin, and the subject line says, office politics, and I started reading. I realized that just the politics here is something that's so minimum that I can barely even identify.
I can't stand politics. Yeah, there's that here.
And I remember just at the Red Sox game, one of the people mentioned that, one of the clients going through a tough day, and, he or she probably complained to him. But yet, even though there's a lot to take in, but the moment that he's with the team at OHO again, he just felt like it wasn't a big deal. So there's something to be said about that, because to me, through my careers of working in, 10 plus years in agencies, is when the clients are being difficult or unreasonable. And when you hang up the phone, you come to an environment where people are not being supportive, but rather finding opportunities to offend you, then it's a very, very different environment. And I think at the end of the day, we all need to feel safe. And in order to deliver, and I feel like that's how I feel here. And I feel like that's how definitely most people feel as well. So
it sucks to feel like, your boss isn't with you, or someone's gonna, get your back, right? And I think you're right. Like, I think there's lots of ways to solve problems, and figure out like what's the right thing, like what's really going on underneath here, right? Like, so someone's mad about something, or a client's mad about something, right? It's not just that thing, but like, let's go talk it out, right? Like, we try not to brush stuff under the rug, right? And being able to talk about all that stuff, I think, is right. It makes it feel safer, right? Because you don't feel like you're going to be surprised about something.
I think also coming out of this type of environment, you become a better person. And I don't mean to kind of throw this umbrella statement, because a lot of what you described is also valid for relationships. Romantic, non-romantic relationships is, people don't hold something against you where you feel that you're not safe in that relationship. So I've constantly seen, Stephanie is a good example when, something doesn't quite go as planned, and she immediately triages, and then she kind of just be there for the team. So I can talk a little bit more about you, because when we quote unquote prepped for this interview, you mentioned the word transitions, and that literally piqued my interest.
Okay.
And you're like, I'm not sure, but I'm a strong believer, and as I'm learning in the past 2 years of just talking to people between the age of literally 17 to 60, that I've learned that all of us are going through transitions. And it's really uncomfortable sometimes. So what are some of the transitions have you experienced?
Transitions. I feel like there's always transitions, right? Like, I think the transitions I go through a lot it feels like I don't know they're happening all the time, right? I think that's what's, I think, running your own business, like, I feel like you don't know what you don't know, like, and so you're surprised or things happen, and you don't have a boss, or a good boss who's giving you some sort of perspective, right? And saying like, oh, this is what's happening, or that's going to be okay, right? You're like, I don't know, is that going to be okay? Like, I think there's lots of questions a lot of times, and so
where do you seek advice from? I realize that's one tough question for a lot of the CEOs out there.
It's really hard. I would say, I think that's one thing I've been looking more for, right, is actually thinking about how can I peers at some level, right? And so I think finding people who are in business, other people that run other agencies or, digital companies, right? And I think I've been married as long as I've had my business, right, or almost as long. And, I think my wife is great, but I think it's hard for her even to understand everything, right? Like, and it's just... right, like there's just something about, she works for a big company, right, where there's lots of politics, where I'm like, why do you BCC people? I don't understand that, right? Like, there's like a whole like culture that I was like, I don't even understand that part. But I think that, I think just, and she's been with me and super supportive, and I think but I think there's just something different about like just all the dynamics of like all the different hats that at one level, like pitching a client, and then, triaging a project, and then someone's pissed off in the office, right? Like, you just there's seasons where things are going really, really, there's just a lot, right? And you think, I can't believe I'm having this conversation, right? Like, but you're wearing an HR hat, and you're wearing a this hat, right? And I think seasons come and go, right? But I think that those are just exhausting times too, right? And there's a lot. So I think finding people who are like, in a similar role to me, I think is really helpful. That's been the most helpful, I would say. I think I'm looking for some more of those right now. I think this year that was one of my goals, which I'm not going to achieve, of finding more like-minded people.
I know it can be really tough because as I'm just kind of running through the list of people I respect and consider as mentors, there's something very different about the position you're in, which you founded the company.
Right.
And I don't like to use the word baby because I feel like it's, you can't let go. And but it's very different than someone who's managing an office, like appointed and who's accountable by basically their titles. They're put in that position versus you created this opportunity. So it can be tough. Well, keep me posted. I'll be very interested in who you find are as peers.
Sure.
But also in the season of where we are in Boston, MIT, I feel like every time I pick up the newspaper, rarely now, but when I'm online, I feel like there's so many startups and people talking about starting up a company, the entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of that in conversations day to day. So a lot of those people haven't really spoken with someone who have done this in the past. So could you help us kind of demystify the startup process or running a company? What are some of the misconceptions?
Something that comes to mind, right, is at some level, I think the actual work is not usually the hard part. So whatever you're making or doing or service you're providing, usually you have some competency, right? And if you're programming something new or you're coming with presumably you have some sense of skill in doing that, right? So as a graphic designer, I had some sense of skill of actually doing this stuff, and I could make something that people liked, right? That is not the hard part, right? The hard part is, how do you grow that business? What do people want? How do you get people to know about you, right? There's all the other stuff around the business that you have to figure out, right? And I think that's the stuff that feels, at one level hard, right? It's how does all this stuff happen? We have some new kind of sort of servicey product stuff we're thinking about right now, and it's the same thing, right? Delivering that is not actually hard. The technology, not rocket science, right? Things that have been around, but it's the application and the use and we talk a lot about customer journey for our clients. I think for us, it's what do people really want? Increasingly, I feel like it's the conversations that matter, right? And the listening that is actually more important now. So we're just taking calls with people that might use the thing we're doing just to listen and be how would this work and what would that look like? And you realize, they might be interested in the idea, but it would take 2 years for them to buy something because they would have to bring people from all different divisions in to talk about that. So, that's really interesting, but they would never spend that much money on it, right? Or trying to find out what is it that's really interesting. And so that research part, which I think is really interesting to me, is also frustrating to me too, because why don't you just get it? This totally would work. And I know if we used it, we would have an impact. But how do you bring people along in that, right? And how do you educate people? And I like that part. I like that education part. I think I realized that journey is a lot longer, and the conversations and the articulating those things and refining that is just a lot. It takes a long time, and it's a lot harder.
I find it kind of a similar experience also creating my own tiny little project compared to, what you're describing as a company. But there are times where you feel like you're just propelling forward and you're accelerating. And there are times that you're like, this is going to work. That makes total sense to this small 4 or 5 of us. But to kind of introduce to an agency, even at the scale of 25 to 30 people, there's going to be some level of healthy resistance, sort of doubts to say, okay, let's talk about this as a team.
Right.
And there are moments, I think it's natural. There's that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And, and that's why I feel I appreciate the fact that that's something you realize. And when we had this hallway conversation, you said, well, you need buy-in. So it's okay to kind of pause for a moment, Yeah,
I mean, I think, one of the things we did is we, offsite planning and revisioning and restructuring of us this year. I found myself sort of through the sort of structure we're looking at, people are well, you're really in this kind of visionary role, which I don't tend to view myself as a visionary. I feel like I'm a little too tactical and practical, but I do have I think increasingly that was helpful for me at one level to say I actually have a vision of where we can go. For me, it's learning about how do I how do I develop those ideas? How do I, this year's been a lot more thinking about, great, well, here's an idea, here's a vision, like, what do I do? How do I write that up? How do I propose it? How do I work that through? How do I then bring that to our leadership team and get more input? And then being able to hear, like, they don't think that's really going to work, right? Like, I think that's part of it. You're like, okay, like, let's table that, right? Or we'll, and it's, and part of my job is trying to figure out, where are we headed? What's it worth investing in? And what new things are happening, or what new direction should we be? But, being able to realize, well, maybe one of the 10 ideas is good, right? And is worth pursuing and worth going after and has traction.
So when I was interviewing a bunch of 18-year-old at New North High School, and the art teachers, the students actually reflected upon the one thing they learned the most from that class is hold your ideas loosely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I noticed that's kind of what you're describing here, and it's a very powerful thing. And another gift I find in you is, better said, to be, a beacon of clarity, because what I know it sounds like almost like a punch in the face, but what I love the most about the point of clarity is I've worked on many projects and bigger agencies where clarity is that one thing that's missing. And I oftentimes find myself to be in the room holding a marker to say, I think that's what you said. I'm going to write down exactly. And it actually helps when that's not what I meant. And it's, let's use this word instead. Let's try something like that. But oftentimes there's a lot of confusion. However, whenever we communicated, whether it's about this project or others, I never hung up the phone or finished the email. So I think I need to kind of dissect that message and manipulate it somehow to actually get it. Right. So I love that level of transparency. Is that something have you always been that way, or are you? So
I would say yes. I have low tolerance for a lack of clarity. So which doesn't mean I have a low tolerance. So I over the course of the years, I have a business coach that I work with. I have, I think have had a variety of assessments, right? And I think part of my realm is that I have a mid-level explore capacity and a high-level excite capacity. So I view a lot of what I do is getting people excited about stuff. Mm-hmm. And so if it's not clear and it's not connecting with people, it drives me crazy. So I think I would say that's an area where I feel like, getting something done, why are we here? What are we talking about? Where are we going? What is really the problem? And that can sound, when I say it that way, it sounds like I'm impatient around that. And I probably am a little bit impatient, but I'm also willing to be let's go through the nuance of this problem, right? So it's not, I'm not legalistic or firm in that way, but it is really trying to say well, okay, that's true, but I also think this is true. What is that tension, and how do we resolve that tension, right? And saying we really need to make the right choice, and let's have a conversation about that. I have limited explore capacity. I like to explore a little bit. I will not go for 2 weeks and think about something. I need to explore it and do it and work it out, and then frankly I need to present it, right? And that's kind of how I work, right? And so. In part because I think that's how we are as a company, right? And now I try and bring more people in doing that, right? So that they get a feel for what it's really like to work with us. Yeah, I want to be clear. I want people to leave and know, this is what I should do, right? Learning that skill over 15 years takes a long time, right? And it takes getting burned, right? Like there's certainly times when I did not give enough feedback and I was not clear enough because I was afraid or I didn't want to tell someone that's not right? Even though I knew in my gut it wasn't right. So I, learned by paying the price, by taking it to a client, and then the client being like, that's not right. And I'm being like, yeah, that's not right. And then I have to go back, right? So you feel like, great, I was afraid to tell somebody who worked for me that it wasn't good enough or it wasn't in the right direction or it was missing some tone, right? And so, and being able to understand that and be clear and reflect that back, like I think people feel like, okay, you get us. Like I think that's really helpful for people.
You reminded me of these moments where some of the guests on the show I have never even met in person still.
Really?
And yeah, it's crazy. We're on Skype and then you see them lean forward and say, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anybody. And we're like, we're recording this, right? It's going to go live. But they're like, no, this is really worthwhile. A lot of that has to do with, transitions, startups. And they sincerely want to make this episode to make people's time worthwhile.
Yeah.
I want to share this. And I love that. We have 5-10 minutes left. Sure. And we talked about parenthood a little bit too. And I feel like it wouldn't be fair to and there's so many parallels to what you described, that clarity and, trust and loyalty. And I remember growing up, the one thing I struggled when I was really young is I had to read my parents, and they're really talented, successful people. But there are moments that I felt like I didn't quite get them. And it was really difficult for a 6-year-old to have to read adults. And so I know you have 3 kids, and I'm going to, their ages, I don't want to
15, 12, and 9.
Okay.
That's 2 boys and a girl.
Wow. So, you've been very busy running your company.
Yep.
I work long hours. And what has sort of parenthood how has it weaved into running a company? And I've seen 2 of your children at this point running around the office.
I do. I bring them here occasionally, which occasionally they love and other times they don't like. So I don't. It changes all the time, right? Like, so lots of our staff who are 8-10 years younger than me, right, have young kids now, right? And I think, oh my gosh, it's so exhausting. Like, how did I make it through that? Right? Like, how did I sleep, right? And I tell people, I say, I didn't drink a lot of coffee until I had kids, and I didn't think that it was really about the caffeine, but it probably was. But it was like my private space. It was like my coffee was like, this is my little world, and like I'm so exhausted. It's like my own. It's like a little crutch, right? And so like that was like, I'm gonna go have my coffee, and that's for me. If no one else is having it, right? And I think that was exhausting. So I mean, but I totally love being a parent. So I do pickups, so I leave every day by 5 usually, and I do drop-offs in the morning, and I do all the cooking in our house. So if we're gonna have dinner, I'm cooking. So and my wife, she occasionally cooks, but I think I do all the grocery shopping and all the cooking, and so I think that's really important to me. I think having dinner together has been really important. We've been a little off schedule recently with new sports schedules and everyone's starting school. So I think I miss that, and I feel like it helps me stay grounded and it helps our family connect. So I really appreciate that, and I like cooking too. I also feel like I tend to feel like I can. I would say at this point it's my hobby, right? So I feel like I can do something that I feel in control of, and I feel like it's just me, and I don't have to listen to anybody else.
Is it like meditation?
It's slightly meditative, yeah. And people have learned not in the last 10 minutes before I'm trying to get to dinner at the table, like ask me questions like that are really important, or ask me to do anything that like will require like me to remember that later.
It's a bad time.
It's a bad time.
I'm impressed because running a company and having to run to a grocery store at 5 o'clock, which I have experienced.
Oh, I shop only once a week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay,
No, I don't shop. No, that would not work. Though I occasionally stop and pick something up on the way home as I'm like walking to my car here. But
what are the things? One of my favorite questions for parents is, what is that you would like to leave for your children that's not money? What are the things that are most important for you to distill in them?
I think I want my kids to understand like sort of what they've been given in life, right? And I want them to know that they're loved, and that they're unique, and that God's made them each uniquely, and that their passions, right, are different, right? And I think it's amazing to me to see that my oldest son loves to fish. I mean, he loves it. And I remember the first time we went fishing, he was watching this cartoon called Caillou, which is on PBS. When, I was in some early morning sleep-deprived state, and he watched this, and they went fishing, and he's like, I want to do that this weekend. He's probably like 5 or 6 or 7, something like that. And so we were going to the Cape, and so I had an old fishing rod there, and we like went fishing, right? He loves it. It's like he watches fishing videos. Like when you're like, what are you watching on YouTube? Fishing videos, right? He gets like the Bass Pro catalog. Like, I like fishing, okay. I never really had done it, but he loves it. Like, it's his thing that he's passionate about. And he just, like, there's these moments when you realize, like, my child is like, he's totally different. Like, you kind of think, like, oh, maybe he'll be into the things that I was into, like building haunted houses or photography or drawing architecture. Like, my kids don't really do that, right? Like, but they have these own passions. And, like, my other son is, like, super competitive, right? And I'm super competitive, too, but he, like, super competitive, like, and he wants to be better, and he'll like go train, he'll like go hit baseballs, and he'll go running. Like, he'll come back from school and he'll be like, I'm going running, and I'm like, that's like that I don't run, and that is weird to me, right? And I just think like when you start realizing like your children are just, they're totally different. My daughter, I think she has a vision, right? Like, she's like the creative genius in our family, right? And she comes home and she's like, I had a vision, and then she'll go away for an hour and just be totally quiet and work on something, right? And I think it's just so fascinating to me, like, how they're totally different, right? And how, and wanting them to really know, like, I want them to know that they're different that way. But I think I also want them to know, like, think about having someone live with us who, is seeking asylum right now, and then have them be part of our house, right? And I felt like our lives are more than just the stuff that we have and the jobs that we do. And, I was telling you that I think I heard this quote recently, which I thought was helpful to me. It was like, in the end, all you have are kind of the stories, right? And kind of the people in those stories, and the way I would extend that. And I think that feels true, right? Like, I think, like the work passes away. I think, we were somewhere with, some folks in our company, right? And you realize, like, it's the stories about the stuff that's happened. And, the project's gone, it's over, it's probably not even up anymore, right? But like the stories that we have about like traveling to the client, and like, the nightmares that we had, and the, working late on something, and, just the kind of that sort of stuff, and the connections that we have with the people. I think those things are really important.
I love that. Wow. I was completely absorbed into this, just thinking, I couldn't end on a better note. And I was also thinking that we need to translate the parenthood part in Chinese, because so many Chinese parents are struggling to kind of separate themselves from their kids. And my mom has been a pretty severe example. It's always we, like she still hasn't really seen us as two separate like individuals.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think everybody is different. And also just the culture and just being the only child. Unfortunately, I'm the only child.
Okay.
It's more fun when you're a kid. You grow, everything was for you. But now, as I get older, I don't think any of the materialistic stuff matters to me anymore. It's the freedom, it's creativity. But this is so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. Good to talk.
To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, other tools, and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter at Feisworld. Until next time, thanks for listening.